Good morning, bienvenue à tous. Welcome to the 77th meeting of the Standing Committee on Citizenship and Immigration in our 42nd Parliament. Today we are continuing, and it will be our last meeting hearing witness testimony with respect to the order of reference on the study of immigration to Atlantic Canada, known as Motion 39, and we welcome all our witnesses. You're kind of the cleanup crew to make sure that we have everything that we need to do before we consider a report to go to Parliament, which we hope will further this issue for not only Atlantic Canada, but all Canadians who are concerned about this. I think we will begin with Susan Wilson and Jeffrey Green, who are joining us through a video conference from J.D. Irving in St. John, New Brunswick. So for 7 minutes.
Great, thank you. Just in our slide deck, we'll reference slide number 3 to begin with. J.D. Irving Limited has a long, proud history of operations here in Atlantic Canada, and particularly in the province of New Brunswick. Our core business is forestry and forest products, but as you can see, we're diversified across a number of industries, from construction and shipbuilding to retail and consumer products. Moving ahead to slide number 4, you can see a snapshot of our projection for our workforce needs over the next 3 years up to 2019. And it highlights that we have a number of job opportunities, career opportunities, with our projection a little over 7,700 jobs to fill to 2019 in Atlantic Canada, with most of those jobs being here in New Brunswick. Moving ahead to slide number 5, you can see a snapshot of a number of our jobs here in New Brunswick, where the core requirements around education require high school, trade certification, or college. Really, our highlight here is that these are good jobs, they're local jobs, and really our requirement here is on an educated and skilled workforce to fill these roles. And similarly, just moving ahead to slide number 6. You can see our projection, almost 730 jobs in the province of New Brunswick where a university education will be required. Again, emphasizing an educated and skilled workforce. Most of those jobs, as you can see, are in engineering and finance, right at the top of the list. From a strategy perspective, moving forward to slide number 7, really our strategy for growing and building our workforce has four key pillars, starting with keeping folks at home. And for us, that's really about engaging the next generation workforce, but also growing and developing our workforce here at home. And that's about building the skills and capability of the Atlantic Canadian workforce. One of our pillars is also looking to bring Atlantic Canadians home. So that's bringing them home, whether that's from across Canada or elsewhere. And of course, the immigration piece, working to find people to make Atlantic Canada their home would be the 4th pillar of our overall strategy.
Okay, moving to slide number 8, I'd like to talk a little bit about specific attraction and retention challenges here in the Atlantic provinces. Firstly, related to current residents of Canada, we do find a perceived lack of opportunities in candidates that we speak to. Driven by a perceived low growth of the economy in the area and high taxes. That would be something we would be having conversations with our candidates within the Atlantic provinces or within Canada. Specifically, though, to the immigrant community, it is a challenge to build a cultural network in the Atlantic provinces that's significant enough to create a critical mass and attract immigrants to the area, specifically in consideration of larger centers such as Montreal or Toronto or Vancouver. So the challenge of building a sense of belonging and creating those communities in Atlantic Canada is a particular challenge. We move to slide number 8, speaking specifically around the Atlantic Immigration Pilot and our experience to date. It is a very good initiative in our opinion and completely aligns with our strategies that Jeff laid out earlier. We've seen a significant improvement in our processing times through the immigration steps and improved support through both the federal and the provincial governments, and I would speak specifically to strong partnerships on the provincial side. We've approved 19 candidates through the Atlantic Immigration Pilot to date. We have 14 more in progress. And for 2018, our numbers continue to go up, specifically in the areas of truck driving, forestry operators, skilled trades, and IT. Recommendations from J.D. Irving related to the pilot. We'd like to see continued support to find more candidates, a more aggressive recruiting approach in partnership with our governments, as opposed to a passive approach, assistance to employers for where we can find the expertise and skills we're trying to source, and help the candidates through the process, and improved relationship with the candidates, with the government, to help people through the steps of the immigration process. Secondly, we are recommending an integrated access for employers to settlement services, what we're calling a one-stop shop to assist employers with where to seek out and best utilize the settlement resources that are available to us. And then thirdly, another area for opportunity is criteria through the process to assist employers with retention. Perhaps that employers could have a means to secure new candidates to stay with their employer for a period of 18 to 24 months to help with retention. Thank you. Those are our comments.
Very good. Thank you very much. I think slide 7 is quite clever with the keep them home, grow at home, bring them home, make it home. Someone did a good job on that. Thank you. Moving to the City of Moncton.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you. Merci for allowing us to speak with you today on an issue that is of great importance to Monctonians. Our community has been very active and innovative on ways to integrate immigrants. Through our experience with the Atlantic Immigration Pilot, we will outline actionable ideas to increase immigration attraction, integration, and retention. Le but de notre communauté est d'attirer un nombre.
Our aim is to draw in a great number of immigrants over the next decade, 15,000, to ensure that we can resettle and maintain them at home. 25,000 immigrants over the next 10 years then. Right now, we are drawing in about 1,000 new people a year. And that includes international students.
To implement key initiatives and services for immigrants. But we also feel that changes in federal policy, along with financial support, would enable us to be even more efficient and effective in supporting immigrants and newcomers in the Moncton area. Moncton has hundreds of available positions in such key sectors as IT, finance, insurance, back office support, and trucking and logistics, just to name a few.
To maximize our efforts, we wish to propose the following recommendations. La présence d'un bureau d'immigration, réfugiés et citoyens.
An immigration citizenship office in New Brunswick, provided by Canada, would give families and new immigrants direct contact with that service. A local office would really be necessary to respond quickly to local issues. It's important to have access to an IRCC office, and without that, it's even more difficult for us to retain our immigrants. Francophone immigration is a priority in New Brunswick. The University of Moncton receives Francophone students from around the world. This is an important source of people interested in Canada who would stay here in the right circumstances.
Resources to integrate international students into the labor market. We must make it easier for them to become permanent residents with increased access to language, training, and support services during their studies so they can integrate more easily after graduation into the labor market. This alone would increase retention with a group that should be easy to integrate and employ. La Ville de Moncton pense qu'un financement et un soutien.
The City of Moncton feels that more funding and more support for multicultural efforts in Greater Moncton would make it a greater centre, a Francophone centre that would attract more Francophones. to New Brunswick, and this would have a real effect on our ability to retain people. Also, cutting down the waiting lists for daycare centers, for example, would help us find work for spouses.
Faith is another area we believe would offer a solid return on investment. There's no federal funding that we know of to help ethnocultural associations and places of worship support immigrant populations. This federal funding for support in a community like Moncton would have a significant impact. In terms of the Atlantic immigration pilot, increased financial allocations will help grow our community. The city has been working diligently with our federal and provincial counterparts to identify employers. Although the pilot is new, from a Moncton perspective, these are the gaps that we see as the highest priority. Number one, the province of New Brunswick needs its own pre-arrival needs assessment service. We currently don't have a needs assessment or pre-arrival service in New Brunswick, yet we are best placed to provide the most accurate information on our cities and province. Allowing the province to administer its own service or designate another agency to do so on its behalf would improve this service for newcomers and allow them to be better prepared prior to arrival. Number two, increased support to employers. Immigration is still new in Atlantic Canada. More training and initiatives are key to getting employers on board. We need to find a way to directly support employers and to streamline and reduce complexities. Allongement du délai pour les étudiants.
Third, expand criteria length for international students. Under the pilot, international students only have 1 year to secure employment to get their permanent resident status. At the same time, employers must complete all the necessary paperwork to allow them to gain this status. This is unrealistic for both parties. It's not enough time. For both students and employers, increasing the delay from the current 1 year to 3 year application windows would make a significant difference in Moncton's ability to retain international students after they graduate. Providing free language training for international students during their studies would also help. Many of these students want to stay. Improving one or both of their languages and their skills in those languages would give them the tools needed to stay in our bilingual city and provinces.
Program, which is number 5, to include international students who are enrolled in a 1-year diploma program from our community colleges. It is arguably these students that need the most assistance to fast-track their immigration process. Number 6, provide accelerated and increased federal funding to settlement agencies to ensure that their services are in line with new arrivals. We need to ensure a streamlined and efficient funding process to ensure these agencies have the resources to do their important work. And finally, number 7, ensure that all employment opportunities are included under the Atlantic immigration pilot. For example, our hospitality sector has many unfilled support staff positions. The pilot, unfortunately, many of these positions do not qualify for the National Occupational Classification, NOC, skill levels. So the pilot should include levels such as the NOC-D positions as well. En conclusion, la Ville de Moncton vous remercie.
To conclude, the City of Moncton would like to thank you for being invited to speak today. Despite the challenges we face, we're proud of our successes. We've welcomed many immigrants. With some policy changes and creative solutions and increased dialogue, such as the one right here, we can be even more successful in welcoming immigrants and their families.
The long-term success of our community and all communities in Canada, and ultimately for New Brunswick. We need people, families, and workers with diverse skills who will do, and we will do everything we can to make it easy for them to live, work, and play in our community. Thank you very much for your attention.
Merci beaucoup, tout le monde.
Thank you to both of you. We will continue by hearing Professors Ramos and Yoshida.
Good morning. Thank you for inviting us to present to this committee. I'm Yoko Yoshida, Associate Professor of Sociology at Dalhousie University, and this is Howard Ramos, Professor of Sociology, same at Dalhousie University. So our presentation this morning is based on the document that we submitted as a brief to this committee. We also have additional reports and information you can find on our website, perceptionsofchange.ca, perception of change in one word.ca. So today we will offer our overview of our analysis of longitudinal immigration database, which captures landing records and tax records of the immigrants. Our analysis focuses on the immigrant tax filers to Atlantic Canadian provinces and compares the Atlantic Canadian immigrants to the Canadian average. So we have several observations to share with you. First, recent economic principal applicants have a higher rate of employment in Atlantic Canada 1 year after landing compared to the Canadian average in all but one province. So for example, nationally, 73% of economic principal applicants had a job 1 year after landing. And that rate was 90% in Newfoundland and Labrador, 76% in Nova Scotia, 74% in New Brunswick. The Prince Edward Island was the only province which had a lower than national average. Likewise, recent economic principal applicants also had a higher earnings average than the national average in all but one Atlantic Canadian provinces, and the PEI was the outlier. And now the spouses and partners who come with the economic principal applicants, however, did not fare well in the Canadian provinces. They had a lower rates of employment compared to the national average of the same category 1 year after landing in Canada. And in terms of earnings, the story is rather mixed. In Newfoundland and Labrador, they had higher earnings than national average. Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, they had almost same as Canadian average, slightly higher. In Prince Edward Island, earning was slightly lower than the Canadian average of the same category of immigrants. Based on these findings, and then also the fact that the Atlantic Immigration Pilot and, to some degree, Express Entry System focus on employers playing a role in settlement, we believe that a key to success of this program is to tap into the employment potential of the spouses and partners, especially for those who follow the principal applicants of economic stream. Likewise, however, the story is slightly different for recent family-sponsored spouses and partners. They have better employment outcomes in Atlantic Canada as compared to the national average. And this happens across all the Atlantic provinces. And in terms of earnings, they also have higher earnings than Canadian national average of the equivalent categories. However, Prince Edward Island was again a little lower than the national average. So based on these results, we believe that much more can be done to promote the economic success of immigrants to Atlantic region. And provinces and region needs to, in a way, bust the myth about the region's economy for immigrants, and they need to challenge the stereotypes based on experiences of the earlier cohorts of immigrants to this region. And Howard has a little bit more points to share.
We've also observed that most of the trends for immigrants in the region are driven by successes we see in Atlantic Canadian cities rather than rural areas. Although in the report that we submitted, we didn't look at urban-rural differences, this is something we've begun to examine in our other research and something that we've been looking at more generally as we've been working on these issues. In the report that we submitted, Prince Edward Island is the most rural of the Atlantic Canadian provinces and suggests that immigration to the rural areas is a struggle for recent immigrants. And this is something that needs to be considered. When you look at the cities in the Atlantic region, they're actually doing fairly well. If you look at unemployment rates in places like Moncton, they're below the national average. In Halifax, they are competitive with the national average. And we suspect that employment for immigrants in those cities is going to be better than in rural areas. So it's important to recognize that immigrants alone are not going to solve the problems of economy in rural areas. And it's important to give immigrants a fair shot in the cities where the economy is working well. Our demographic analysis of recent immigrant tax filers in Atlantic Canada shows that economic principal applicants are mostly men. The spouses and partners that come in the economic category, as well as family sponsor, are mostly women. We find that, except for Prince Edward Island, most people migrating are of working age. And one thing that we see is that Atlantic Canada as a whole has a lower proportion of immigrants arriving with a university education. And this is something that we find surprising given the high concentration of universities in the region. And we recognize that this is a missed opportunity for Atlantic Canadian provinces and for the federal government to promote a transition from university to employment and immigration in the region. We also believe that the demographics suggest that the region can do more to diversify the intake of immigrants to the region, focusing on issues of gender, of family reunification, and in particular focusing on student transitions. We recognize that there are economic obstacles in Atlantic Canada, but we also recognize that first and foremost the problems that the region are facing are demographic, and that the solution to the economic problems are really about solving the demographic problems. And on this front, it's important for the region to try and compete against other regions in Canada and other countries and take advantage of the demographic differences that we have in Atlantic Canada rather than suffer from them. We also recognize on this front that it's important for Atlantic Canadian provinces to embrace that unique demography and to consider anchoring effects. In other words, demography that leads to anchoring immigrants to the region, that promotes staying in the region rather than transitioning into other regions. Last, we also recognize that it's important for the success of the Atlantic immigration pilot project, as well as for immigration in the region more generally, to have access to data. That one of the obstacles we face as researchers is a lack of available data from Statistics Canada. And this is important to be able to benchmark how immigrants are performing in the region. So on this front, it's important to make sure that national surveys oversample the region so that we can begin to tweak and not just rely on administrative data, which we're able to access because we work with the province of Nova Scotia. But it limits the amount of researchers and businesses and other people who can look at data if it's only accessible through the province or the federal government. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Hahn, you're our last witness.
Oh my. Good morning, everyone. My name is Michael Hahn, and I'm the Canada Research Chair in Migration and Ethnic Relations at Western University. My primary research interests are in the areas of immigrant recruitment and retention and internal migration. I'm particularly interested in studying how research and policy can be used to affect changes in these domains, and I thank you for inviting me here today. Coming to you today from London, Ontario, I may seem like an outsider to Atlantic Canada, but before I was at Western, I worked at the University of New Brunswick as the Canada Research Chair in Population and Social Policy. I have worked with all 4 provincial governments in Atlantic Canada to increase success levels in terms of immigrant recruitment and retention, as have Howard and Yoko. In preparation for today, I watched a lot of the footage from this committee, not all 77 sessions, but many of them, and I'd like to put a finer point on one of the comments made on May 29th by the Honourable David Tilson, who's not here today. He recalled high rates of out-migration from when he was studying at the University of New Brunswick, and I agree with him, but please allow me to provide you with a little bit more detail. In 1951, Atlantic Canada was the heart of the Canadian baby boom, with each province posting fertility rates that ranged from between 4.8 and 5.1 children for every woman aged 15 to 64. Provincial governments at the time were fretting about how they'd accommodate such huge population growth. Now, roughly 65 years later, the region occupies the bottom 4 spots, with fertility rates that range between 1.34 and 1.48 children per woman. Discussions today tend to center on how the region will cope with population implosion rather than explosion. So what happened? Several things. Most notably, however, was that in the 1960s and 70s, nearly half of that earlier baby boom left the region. Half. Forgive the morbid analogies, but that is a greater proportion than what died in either World War, and it's approximately on par with the number of people that died from the Black Plague in the 1300s in Europe. Most of the people that left Atlantic Canada headed west to capitalize on opportunities in the rest of the country, and capitalize they did. Citing statistics for only New Brunswick, I have found that those that left the province were twice as likely to own a business, 3 times as likely to have a university degree, and 4 times as likely to earn more than $100,000 per year than those that stayed. I have no reason to suspect huge differences in other across Atlantic Canadian provinces. So where did these out-migrants build their successes? Well, I think it was in many of the communities that you and I live in. And although some went back to the Atlantic, most didn't. They built their fortunes in the rest of Canada and built fortunes for the rest of Canada. So profound demographic change has, as Mr. Tilson noted, been the norm in Atlantic Canada. But does that then mean that this will always be the case, or that we should give up on trying to change the region? Well, I would argue that we should be rooting for Atlantic Canada, because it was the hard work of Atlantic Canadians that helped make the country as prosperous and dynamic as it is today. It just didn't happen in their province of birth, as often as it needed to for that region to prosper. The Atlantic immigration pilot is radical. There's no doubt about it. It removes requirements that continue to apply to the rest of the country. I would say that the question of whether the region should receive special treatment or not is probably misplaced. Instead, we should be asking whether the program is likely to work and whether or not Atlantic Canada should get the first crack at this type of immigration reform. I think when you consider the demographic duty that the region has done for the country as a whole, it's the least we can do. Also, aside from the provincial nominee program and parts of the express entry program, this is one of the first major initiatives that allow local labor markets to fill their own shortages. It used to be the federal government predominantly making choices about who enters the country, and by and large they did a good job. But arguably, centralized programs did not necessarily take smaller, shallower labor markets into account as much as they could have. Much like the Atlantic immigration pilot is radical, there are other radical thoughts and experiments that might be worth considering. Please note that, to my knowledge, none of these is currently being contemplated. First, current taxation rules dictate that individuals must pay taxes in the province in which they reside on December 31st of the taxation year. What this does is it encourages people to move from high tax provinces, like those of Atlantic Canada, to low tax provinces, like those in Western Canada. Another way to think about taxation is to allow people to pay the marginal tax rate of the province in where they perform the majority of their work. If, for most of the year, an individual flies to Alberta for a 21-day shift, then heads back to Cape Breton, couldn't they pay Alberta income tax rates in Nova Scotia? True, the Nova Scotia government wouldn't get quite as much money as they would under their own tax regime, but it's a lot more money than the zero they'd get when the individual decides to go to a lower tax area. Second, perhaps we need to think about retention more broadly. I understand that the pilot is focused on keeping newcomers in Atlantic Canada, but let's suppose that it doesn't work very well, and that some people move elsewhere after a few years. Is this necessarily such a bad thing? As someone that has lived all over Canada, I can say with certainty that they'd be starting out in one of the kindest, most welcoming regions in Canada, and that this would position them well if they choose to go elsewhere. That may increase national retention rates, even if it doesn't necessarily affect the provincial or regional rate. If, conversely, the pilot works perfectly, and does exactly what it's supposed to, then great. Package up the best pieces and use it in other parts of the country that are struggling with population decline. Neither of these outcomes seem negative to me. The key to the success of the pilot, in my opinion, is that administrators espouse a what works strategy as much as possible. If the removal of work experience does not increase retention, for example, abolish or tweak those provisions. If students don't stay in the region after graduation, then reconsider including them as part of the pilot. We have the data and we can test these things. Central to this is having an evaluative framework that is both nimble and nonpartisan. The United Nations expects us to reach global peak population by about 2025. What this means is that the surplus of people from other countries will come to an end. That is only 8 years from now. After that, expect the recruitment and retention of immigrants to become far more competitive on a global basis. The time to get it right is now, and I think we should be running at least one experiment like the Atlantic pilot at all times. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Did Mr. Whalen write your remarks? Just kidding.
I will say, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to thank everyone for coming today and providing the final recommendations and information to the committee. It fully reiterates, in many respects, what we've heard all along. But I will add that some of Mr. Hand's comments are new, and I would endorse them entirely, except perhaps some of the tax stuff. But in terms of the story, the morbid tale also continues. And I just want to add a little bit additional information, focus on one generation. So from 1992 until 2017 tells a slightly different tale. And you can see this information from StatsCan. So the national population was 28 million. Newfoundland's population, 580,000. Prince Edward Island's population, 136,000. Nova Scotia's population rounds up to 920,000. New Brunswick, 478,000. Between then and July 1st of this year, 2017, the national population has grown to 36.7 million by 31%. Newfoundland's has fallen to 528,000, down 10%. Prince Edward Island, even though Dr. Ramos said that it was the most rural of the Atlantic provinces, I'm sure the people in Prince Edward Island would disagree. Almost all of them live within 30 kilometers of Charlottetown or Summerside. But they actually posted, fairly reasonable growth in our area, up to 152,000. Flat in Nova Scotia at 953,000, and flat in New Brunswick at 759,000. So over the last generation, this has been a problem. Newfoundland has actually suffered the collapse that everyone else is looking at it. Now, we suffered the collapse because of the cod moratorium. But now we're suffering an echo crash, but the demographics are clear. Now that births undercount deaths, it's something that's going to happen. And it's not just in Atlantic Canada. It's happening all over the world. If you look at Eastern Europe, where our delegation just came back from Sofia, Bulgaria, and yesterday we met with the Croatian delegation, they are also suffering from the exact same migration trends that Atlantic Canada is suffering from. It's a worldwide problem. And I fully endorse Mr. Hand's comments about the competitive nature of seeking out highly qualified and skilled labor, because as we start to do this now, it will be Germany looking for those immigrants in 10 years because they will not be able to get any more from Bulgaria. There was a very interesting paper written this past month, or published this past month, by the Harris Center, Alvin Sims and Jamie Ward, Harris Center Regional Analytics Laboratory, Regional Population Projections for Newfoundland and Labrador 2016 to 2030. And they take a look at lots of different measures, and they include all the labor related endorsements and trying to fill the labor positions as they're available under all different scenarios, and even under the highest labor replacement scenarios, which is the large driver for immigration. Newfoundland and Labrador still loses 4% of its population over the next 20 years, but anyone who takes a realistic view of it sees that we lose 10 or more % of our population. So it's another collapse. So in order for us to maintain our standards of living, this is an imperative. And so I ask all the witnesses, given that we've had now 25 years of stagnant or falling growth, what can we do different? Will the Atlantic immigration pilot, could it be the silver bullet to help us? Is it something we should do? And I'll start with Mr. Hand.
Thank you for your comments. I think the short story is that there is no silver bullet. We probably have to try various strategies to bring people to the region and to bring people back to the region. No matter what, under all projection scenarios by Statistics Canada, there will need to be some economic restructuring, and I think all 4 Atlantic provinces are going to have very serious discussions about what this will mean moving forward. The Atlantic immigration pilot is at best a partial solution. There will be change underway, and in terms of doing things differently, I think I would go back to my concluding comment that the whole framework needs to be incredibly nimble so that precious time is not lost if something is found to not be effective.
Dr. Yoshida?
Okay, adding to that, my position is to look into the family settlement of immigrants as a unit of family. in a way that when you come to Nova Scotia and Canada altogether, just because one person is working and settled in a labor market really doesn't hold those people into the region. I think that the migrant decision making is based on household well-being rather than individual well-being, and so when the local economy is not as competitive as other market, perhaps until the market becomes competitive enough, diversifying the portfolio of immigrant streams could be a kind of like a way to go. So rather than tapping all these eggs into high flyer, high skilled talent people, perhaps looking into people who are likely to stay in the region as a family or as a neighbor, and start building the society at the same time as developing the economy, so that it becomes a more competitive market relative to others. So essentially looking into the family settlement, so providing the help for the spouses and partners for employment opportunities, etc.
Thank you very much, Dr. Yoshida. And actually, maybe that'll get me onto a different tack, because I have some questions for the folks from JDI. And it really relates to, okay, so I'm a big proponent of, targets based on retention rates for immigration, so that the Atlantic region should have equitably benefit from immigration by having a higher number. That might also help accommodate for the establishment of the cultural communities that will welcome further industries and further immigrants. But then I also wonder about labor demand. And so to the folks from JDI Irving, I mean, how much labor demand do you feel we have in our region so that we can realistically accommodate 1 or 2% immigration growth? And at the same time, if we don't fill the positions that you've identified as already need to be filled by immigration, what happens to your business if you can't fill these spots? Thank you.
Okay, to answer the first question, the labor demand is a clear gap today. In speaking with other businesses in JDI, we have examples today where, to answer the second part of your question, we would have to cut back on some of our production shifts because we do not have the labor out in the facilities to meet all the demands of our customers. So it is live, it is today, and I would say for the foreseeable future, based on the numbers shared earlier, we do not see an issue with placing people, and I would broaden that to the earlier comments around placing broader members of the family. We have such a variety of gaps in different functions, including, as we talked about earlier, from IT down to the manufacturing jobs on the floor, that I think there's a huge opportunity to address the needs of the entire family. Yes?
Oh, thank you for your input.
Mr. McGuire. Mr. Soroya?
No,
Go ahead.
I'll just have a quick question here. In regards to, I want to thank, first of all the panelists for the presentations that they've made. It's been very informative. I certainly want to, though, ask the Irving Limited folks here, thanks very much, Ms. Baxter and Mr. McDonald, but I just, in regards to creating employment, we've had presentations to the committee, even in the short while that I've been on it, indicating that, of course, job creation comes from capital investment, and Dr. Emery mentioned that a couple of days ago here in our committee as well. And can you just indicate to our committee here your thoughts in regards to job creation? I know you've done a lot of it with your investments in not just the refining industry, but other sectors as well. And with the recent decision to cancel the Energy East pipeline is detrimental to the development of the Maritimes, as well as being able to have processing and manufacturing of our own Canadian product here. And I just wondered if you can indicate to us your thoughts in regards to that lack of capital investment that's going to occur in Eastern Canada because of that cancellation, and how that's going to impact job creation in the Maritimes, and therefore the need for more immigration.
Sure. Certainly investment is an important, capital investment is an important factor. In particular with our workforce forecast, we look at, not only attrition and retirements, but what's driving growth. and almost a quarter of our forecast is forecasted around growth, and capital investment, those sorts of things are in the region and in each province are an important factor of that for sure.
And the taxation decisions that the government's made lately on corporations and different parts of your industry as well are not going to help development in many areas, not just the Maritimes, but across the country. But having spent a limited amount of time, I'm from Manitoba, but a limited amount of time in the Maritimes, I have to agree with your other panelists as well. It's a tremendous part of Canada and a great place to live and be. But if we continue to go down the road of increasing taxation on corporations and family businesses, can you just elaborate on your thoughts in regards to how we could enhance bringing people in through taxation process rather than just increasing them on these types of companies?
Any thoughts? Certainly that, that has the potential to be an impact on attracting people to the Atlantic Canadian region and retaining them and keeping them here. I don't know if I can speak specifically on some of the policies and those sorts of things, but I would say in general that the tax issues is something that has to be addressed, especially if we're going to continue to attract and continue to retain new people, new immigrants coming to Atlantic Canada.
I'd like to just direct a question to Mr. Leger as well in regards to your points in regards to retention. Of the 7 that you mentioned, what do you think are the key ones? Like if you had 1 or 2 that you'd like to see implemented?
Well, thank you for the question. I think that what we're really seeing is, first of all, we've had a fair amount of immigration already in Moncton. And certainly from, when I look at the international students, for example, at the University of Moncton, one of the probably predominant factors for us is some language assistance, so that individuals who graduate from local universities, and we're not alone in that, that we could offer the support that students need to be able to enter the workforce. And so that one there is extremely important, along with taking a look at what do we do to make the transition much easier for people who immigrate here. Angelique, who's our immigration strategist, really can probably enlighten us a little bit more too on what she sees. And we've had a lot of really good feedback on the Atlantic immigration pilot, and so just perhaps you can mention 1 or 2.
Yeah, and so the reality in the Moncton region, the city of Moncton, we're growing very quickly. At any time, we have, likely over 1,000 positions available. The employers that we work closely with, are very interested in immigration. They could certainly use additional supports. As immigration is still new to Atlantic Canada, we've seen immense increases over the last 10 years. So additional employer supports, I certainly agree with all the points that JDI is making, as well as the researchers as well, focusing on the spouse as well. And I think the pilot really allows us to think outside of the box too, which is really what we need, I think, for the entire country, and starting to take a look more at the ethnocultural associations and places of faith as a support mechanism to the integration of newcomers, and making sure that we're building diasporas within our community. So when immigrants do arrive in Atlantic Canada within our cities, they are well supported, not just by the settlement agencies and the municipalities, but also by their local communities as well, whether they start to integrate with the ethnocultural communities or their places of faith. Those are key elements, I think, that really allow immigrants, when they arrive, to really integrate in our community.
And we've had a lot of success with job fairs where we've initiated the opportunities for employers to meet recent immigrants and trying to match. And I think that's really important as well. We, as a community, one of our challenges as well is our own population embracing what's happening and sort of allowing us all collectively to work together.
Soroya may have one question here.
I have a question, Mr. Ramos and Sheda. We heard over and over from the number of panels that there is an issue with the rural in the eastern parts in the Atlantic provinces. What can be done? What do we do to make sure it's well balanced and the people feel safe, people feel good, people have the jobs, we can retain them back in the rural areas, so it's balancing the whole situation.
I'm afraid I can give you about 20 seconds to respond.
I think that the answer is really about being bold and focusing on hub centers. If hub centers such as Moncton or Halifax or St. John's do well, the rural areas will do well. And the settlement service providers in those hub centers are very successful, as was just mentioned, because they're big enough and small enough. So they're big enough to offer a full complement of services, but small enough to make the direct tap in to specific businesses, not just the bigger companies, but also the small and medium size. So if the hub centers do well, the rural will do well.
Ms. Kwan, for about 7.5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for your presentations. I think we're all in agreement that we need to enhance immigration numbers. And I know that there's been a lot of discussion around the pilot. The pilot is important, although we heard on Tuesday night, really on the ground, the pilot has actually not yielded the kind of results. It's cumbersome, it's bureaucratic, and it's problematic. And so, from that perspective, there is a question that's on my mind, and that is to say, should we be looking at an immigration policy shift? That is to say, instead of looking at temporary foreign workers programming, really move into more of a permanent residence programming. And then in that instance, people would have the opportunity to not only come for themselves to work, but they can bring their families immediately. And if you have your families here, you can grow your family, and so on and so forth. So from that perspective, I guess I would just like to get some comments. First, for the witnesses on the table here, if I could start with Professor Yoshida with respect to that, because you mentioned about the importance of family and how to grow that in terms of retention particularly.
Thank you very much for the question. In terms of temporary and permanent, I think that the important issue is to provide, open up the venue or the options for the temporary stayer into the permanent residency. So in a way that the temporary workers are already building their network through the employment as well as the community. And if they so wish to stay on a longer term, then there might be a higher likelihood of staying in the region because their experience, already lived experience in the local area. So that might help towards bringing immigrants who are likely to stay, so increasing to the retention as well. But at the same, so anyways, I will just stop here.
I would like to just also quickly add that it's also important to expand the NOC categories in terms of that transition. So not just the high-flying workers, but also the workers who are going to work in lower NOC categories, because those are the ones who are most likely to stay.
We used to have a program in Canada, the Federal Experience Class immigration category, and that would be a range of different people who would come and apply as a permanent residence right from the get-go, and then with a whole range of skill set, right, high, low, medium, everything in between, and so on. And so, but we've done away with that, opting for other programming. But does it seem to me, anyway, it seems to me that maybe it's time for us to actually go back to that programming and to bring in permanent residents from that perspective. So I wonder whether or not I could get perhaps Mr. Han? And then we'll go to the folks on the...
A couple of points. One of the points I'd like to make is that I think it really goes back to this what works strategy. So the federal experience class, when it ran, we can actually identify the individuals that were admitted under those admission categories and identify whether or not they're more likely to remain in an area where they start out, or if they're more highly mobile. And I think the decision about whether or not to bring the program back would rest heavily on whether it worked in the first place. And it sounds like you have some evidence to suggest that it did, but we can look at the earnings profiles of people under that admission category and whether they stuck around. And sure enough, if it turns out that this is an effective program, then I do believe it's worthwhile considering bringing it back. One other point, though, you mentioned in your first question about whether or not we need to see a shift in immigration policy, and I would say that we've already had some pretty radical changes in the immigration system, particularly under the previous government. The minister at the time made sweeping changes to how immigration policies are implemented and how they work, and I think now it might be worthwhile to take a look at how effective these changes have been.
When I talk about the shift, I'm mostly thinking about the heavy concentration from the previous administration on the temporary foreign workers reliance. I don't think actually that served the Canadian population very well. And what we heard from previous panel is that what they want is really to have these individuals stay. In fact, employers themselves to say, we would rather have a direct policy that says they can come and stay and they can bring their family and stay, as opposed to going through this process of temporary process, and then to see whether or not they can stay, and then they can bring their family, which often actually becomes a barrier. So that's what I'm talking about in terms of that shift. I'm going to go to the folks on the video conferencing, there was a lot of talk about the need to ensure that communities provide the infrastructure to retain individuals as well, and so that people can build communities. And I think actually from that perspective, for sure, people on the ground who live in the community, who are the employers and the local government representatives, will know that very well. We also heard from previous panels about the resettlement services. The absurdity of it is that the resettlement services in the community cannot provide for the plan of resettlement. They have to actually rely on the big five that the governments identify outside of the Atlantic provinces, which is counterintuitive to say the least. So I wonder if I can just get some comments around this. Would it benefit, for example, for the government to be looking at an infrastructure program in terms of supporting communities and to build the kind of support systems that would be required to help maintain and retain not only immigrants, and I would argue Canadians that are already there in those regions? So we'll go to the folks on the video conferencing, and I wonder if I could have Mr. Leger, is it?
Yes.
To start?
Yes. Well, certainly, I think our experience with the pilot so far has shown that there are multiple components in this approach. Certainly, the support and how all of the process you touch on, the settlement process and so on. I'm involved with the Multicultural Association of Greater Moncton, and certainly there are some challenges. There's no question. Maybe Angelique can maybe touch more on some of the things. Like we even have some initiatives, for example, where we've opened a branch office in northern New Brunswick, community north of Moncton, to help with some of the transition that they're seeing with respect to jobs available, but no one to fill the jobs. But certainly.
Yeah, so your perspective around policy as well is very interesting. And I guess to one of your points, too, is on for pre-arrival services that you had mentioned with being in the big five or five of the other cities outside of New Brunswick. We do see that as a barrier in New Brunswick. Our settlement agencies as well have expressed that. And we believe that if the province of New Brunswick, because they're extremely active and are doing, from our perception, a very good job on the pilot in terms of employer recruitment and support, if they could actually do the pre-arrival services themselves, really our province is best placed to talk about our own cities, and that would allow the immigrants prior to arrival to be able to better prepare them and their families to come. In terms of infrastructure as well, we certainly agree with that. If we're going to be bringing in more people to New Brunswick, which we're working on very, very hard, particularly in the Moncton area as well, our settlement agencies need to be able to access funding very quickly to make sure that when immigrants do come, We have the primary applicant who is working, which is fantastic, but also the spouse. They need to be able to get into language classes very quickly. And oftentimes, from what we see, they're also coming with young families. And so the child mining as well on site, to be able to expand that is huge.
I think I need to cut you off there. I'm sorry. I'm well over the limit on that one. But thank you very much for that. We're now turned to Ms. Zahid for about 8 minutes. And if you want to, you have about 8.5 minutes if I'm balancing.
I'll be sharing some time with Mr. Whalen also.
He needs more time?
No, I will be sharing some time with Mr. Whalen.
Okay. Ms. Zahid.
Okay, thank you, Chair. And thanks to all of you for coming today. My first question is to both Professor Yoshida and Professor Ramos. I would like to talk about the international students. We all know that Atlantic Canada has a lot of universities and colleges, and students from around the world come there. They spend 2 to 4 years in Canada. Like, they get integrated into the society, and many of those international students would like to stay. They would seem to be the prime candidates for retention after graduation. So do you see any barriers to the retention of the international students? And if you have any suggestions, what we can do to ensure that not only more of them stay in Canada, but especially in Atlantic Canada? And do you have any data or research on the retention of international students and what affects their decision to stay or not to stay in Atlantic Canada?
We're just beginning to look at whether or not international students stay or don't stay. There was a recent report that came out, I believe, last week on international students showing how many stay and leave. And I think it was about 25 to 30% would stay or were interested in staying in Canada versus the majority who want to leave. But still, that's an important share of people to potentially attract to stay in the region, especially given how many universities are in the region and the labor needs of employers. I think the biggest obstacle I've seen, and I've had a PhD student working on the issue, is the complexity of Canada's immigration system is often very daunting for university students, and they are unsure which program to apply to, whether it's the provincial programs or the over 50 options you have at the federal system. And the most important thing that could be done on this front is offering better support to students to navigate the complexity of the system.
Ms. Yoshida?
So one of the, yes, as Howard was mentioning, one of the obstacles to retain these international students is to create some sort of match between the job available in the local area as well as the awareness of the availability of those jobs amongst the students. So even if there are opportunities, students are not necessarily aware of where to go to find those information. So there's a slight disconnect in terms of job availability among students. So, but then I think these days universities are working with the community as well as businesses and providing those kind of fairs and stuff, job fairs, and those are probably very important venues to further explore. And that being said, I am actually launching the new research looking at whether or not the experience in Atlantic universities are actually turning them into getting the permanent residency, and after they became the permanent residents, whether or not the prior experience as a temporary resident, like a student, or the temporary workers actually likely to stay in the region, or they are more likely to migrate elsewhere for the better opportunity. So I am just looking at the data for those information.
Yes.
Very, very briefly. I'm also working on a report for the Atlantic Canada Opportunities Agency on the retention of international students in Atlantic Canada. But the project is underway, but it's in draft format. It may be possible that I could produce an advanced copy for the committee if you find it useful.
That would be really great if you can provide us some.
Sure. It's done with Victoria Estes, Charlie Belkoja.
That would be, thank you. Ms. Yoshida, you talked about the integration of the families. So many of the international students would come with the families. Are there any suggestions we can do how we can integrate their spouses or their families in so that we have a better retention rate?
What we can do? Well, essentially, what I'm my assertion is based on the data which had. So So the people who are actually sponsored to join the family members. So if you are a permanent resident or already in Canada and they came to join these spouses, they tend to do well. So that means that people who have family members who have already the foot already in the doorstep to the community, they tend to do well. So essentially, important thing to help out family members who are accompanying the international students or the newcomers themselves is essentially to plug in one of the people in the family to the local community.
If I could add to this, another element to remember is that the students are actually quite young. And it's important to give opportunities for them to sponsor their parents and or grandparents who are also young. So if you have a 20-year-old student whose parent is 50, that's an opportunity to have people come into the labor force. So it's important to make sure that those pathways open up again.
Thank you. I'll share my time with Mr. Whalen.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Zaid. And so, Dr. Han, in terms of quantifying the issue around interprovincial migration, you provided some interesting information during your speech. It sort of maybe quantifies maybe what some of us always thought, that the more entrepreneurial people who take the leap and move to another part of the country tend to do better than the average. Did you say that their sort of GDP per capita was around 100,000? Was that the number you were using?
The number that I cited was that they were 4 times as likely to earn more than $100,000 if they left their province of birth in Atlantic Canada versus staying in their province of birth in Atlantic Canada.
That's pretty incredible. And so we have a generation of people who have gone out, made fortunes. Some of them are going to start to retire soon. You talked about the migrations during the 60s. The migration that I talked about in the early 90s would have been the 20 to 40-year-old cohort. They're going to move, some of them are going to move home. Is there going to be a net negative economic impact associated with retirees moving home, or is that going to be a positive because they're going to be bringing their capital with them?
I would argue that it's positive, and it is indeed beginning to happen. The baby boomers started to retire in 2011, and we are seeing some evidence of return migration. It's particularly strong in Prince Edward Island, but it is happening in other Atlantic provinces.
Well, I see many friends of my parents from their old school days moving home, buying homes. Is this an aspect of social planning that we need to consider, that if we can attract large numbers of retirees bringing their pensions home to Atlantic Canada to spend them, make sure we're providing the services they need? Could that provide an economic lift?
It has great potential. I mean, I can't answer that question as a yes or no, but it's certainly worth investigating.
Okay, well, maybe it's something for a study by the Human and Social Development Committee. Thank you very much, Mr. Han. I have one final question, if I can squeeze it in. And retention is such an important part of this piece, but it also requires a willingness of the local community to engage. Over the past couple of years, we've seen a real flux internationally in the views of immigration and how people are willing they are to accept. I know the Liberals won all the seats in Atlantic Canada on a strongly pro-immigration platform, but that wasn't the only issue. In your hearts, do you feel that Atlantic Canadians are prepared to accept 1% to 2% immigration over the next 15 to 20 years? Are they, and allow these communities to settle, or do you see resistance? Just honest, please. Start with Dr. Yoshida, and maybe move to the JDI folks.
In my gut instinct, based on my experience living there for the last 12 years, I can see this huge difference between the time 12 years ago and now. And yes, we are ready.
Folks from JDI?
Yes, I'd like to comment on that. Actually, we're seeing a very positive response to some of the things we're doing initially. And to be honest, it's more positive than we anticipated. We're currently seeing less resistance than we were preparing for in some of our communities. With that said, I strongly believe it has to be an orchestrated partnership with the employer, the community, and the points that Angelique was making earlier. It is possible.
Thank you. That's very heartening. I just want to get a quick comment from the folks in Moncton, just if they agree, because this is great news. I just want to make sure it's resounding.
In 5 seconds.
I would agree, and it's really important that cities be involved, and that for example, you add staff, you do things that are really going to help on an individual basis for your employers. But the cities have to go out there as well. It's not all going to be reliant on industry. The last thing is the university partnerships with businesses would be huge in terms of retention of students.
Thank you very much. And I want to thank all the witnesses. I just want to mention that if anybody has anything that they think we should consider in writing, and including members of the committee, I'd like a deadline of 5 p.m. today. You mentioned the Harris Center report, and a few people have mentioned other things. If you think there's anything we should read or have our analysts read for us, it would be 5 p.m. today to finish our study. Thank you to all the witnesses. I quite like the Moncton City mug product placement in the video. Deputy Mayor, you should be very happy with your staff for doing that. And thank you all for joining us. We're going to end this part of the meeting and move into an in-camera meeting.
Thank you.